What are the origins of haplogroup Ji and I? But before we get too deep into the video, first I want to tell you guys about my social media platforms. So I have a Clubhouse account and we can actually talk to one another on it. I also host Clubhouse rooms every now and then where I might talk about history and genetics of the Middle East and Africa. I have a Twitter page, a Facebook account, and a Facebook page, as well as a Instagram, all titled The Hebrew of Israel. And what I typically do on these platforms is post upcoming videos as well as slides for my presentations. And so just be on the lookout for all of that on my social media platforms. And if you want to support me financially for the channel, you can look at my Patreon as well as my PayPal and my GoFundMe. And with all of that out of the way, let's begin with the video. We've looked at haplogroup J extensively, but now it's time to look at the parent clade of haplogroup J, which is Y chromosome IJ. Remember, our goal is to figure out the academic and biblical origins of haplogroup J. Therefore, we need to understand where the parent of haplogroup J came from. So, haplogroup IJ is a human Y chromosome DNA haplogroup, an intermediate descendant of haplogroup IJK, formerly known as haplogroup F-L15. The intermediate descendants of IJ are haplogroup I and haplogroup J. Its sole sibling is K, which includes most of the world's male population. Both of the primary branches of haplogroup IJ, I-M170 and J-M304, are found among modern populations of the Caucasus, Anatolia, and Southwest Asia. This tends to suggest that haplogroup IJ branched from IJK in West Asia and/or the Middle East. IJ split in a typically disjunctive, almost mutually exclusive geographical pattern, with J-M304 far more common in Arabia and I-M170 far more common in Europe. The age of IJ and its subclades suggests that IJ probably entered Europe through the Balkans sometime before the last glacial maximum. The same geographic corridor, the Balkans, also support later gene flow, including the early Neolithic farmers from Anatolia about 9,000 years BP. So one of the oldest samples of I were found in Europe. This haplogroup I sample belongs to a Western hunter-gatherer, and Caucasus hunter-gatherers are related to Western hunter-gatherers. This is from Upper Paleolithic genomes reveal deep roots of modern Eurasians, and it says, we extend the scope of European paleogenomics by sequencing the genomes of late Upper Paleolithic and Mesolithic males from western Georgia in the Caucasus and a late Upper Paleolithic male from Switzerland. While we detect late Paleolithic Mesolithic genomic continuity in both regions, we find that Caucasus hunter-gatherers belong to a distinct ancient clade that split from Western hunter-gatherers, 45 KY, shortly after the expansion of anatomically modern humans into Europe, and from the ancestors of Neolithic farmers, 25 KYA, around the last glacial maximum. Caucasus hunter-gatherer genomes significantly contributed to the Yamnaya steppe herders who migrated into Europe 3000 BC, supporting a formative Caucasus influence on this important early Bronze Age culture. Caucasus hunter-gatherers left their imprints on modern populations from the Caucasus and also Central and South Asia, probably marking the arrival of Indo-Aryan languages. We sequenced a late Upper Paleolithic and a Mesolithic genome from western Georgia at the very eastern boundary of Europe. We term these two individuals Caucasus hunter-gatherers. To extend our overview of Western hunter-gatherers to a time depth similar to the one available for our samples from the Caucasus, we also sequenced a Western European late Upper Paleolithic genome of Berrichon from Geruti de Berrichon in Switzerland. These new genomes, together with already published data, provides us with a much improved geographic and temporal coverage of genetic diversity across Europe after the last glacial maximum. We show that Caucasus hunter-gatherer belonged to a new, distinct ancient clade that split from Western hunter-gatherer 45 KYA and from Neolithic farmer ancestors 25 KYA. This subclade represents the previously undetermined source of ancestry to the Yamnaya and contributed directly to modern populations from the Caucasus all the way to Central Asia. Western hunter-gatherer and Caucasus hunter-gatherer are the descendants of two ancient populations that appear to have persisted in Europe since the mid-Upper Paleolithic and survived the last glacial maximum separately. So basically, Caucasus hunter-gatherers and Western hunter-gatherers, in a sense, they're cousins. They're both descendant of the same population, the same type of people, as they said right here. Western hunter-gatherers and Caucasus hunter-gatherers are the descendants of two ancient populations. So this is what I was just showing. And here is another chart a bit closer showing that the relationship between Caucasus hunter-gatherer and Western hunter-gatherer and early farmers, they come from a common source. So, Caucasus hunter-gatherer contribution to subsequent populations. Now, the Bichon-like younger Western hunter-gatherer shows strongest affinity to Northern Europeans, while contemporary Southern Caucasus populations are the closest to Caucasus hunter-gatherers, thus implying a degree of continuity in both regions stretching back at least 13,000 years to the late Upper Paleolithic. Continually in the Caucasus is supported by the mitochondrial and Y chromosomal haplogroups of Katos, mitochondrial H13C and J2A as the Y DNA respectively, and Satsburia as mitochondrial K3 and Y DNA J, which are all found at high frequencies in Georgia today. So the Y chromosomes, just going to focus on haplogroup I, but I'm just going to read what's in yellow. Both Georgian hunter-gatherer samples were assigned to haplogroup J, with Katos belonging to the subclade J2A. Bichon belongs to Y haplogroup I to A. Haplogroup I has been found at high frequencies in Europe, but is virtually absent elsewhere. This haplogroup is suggested to have a European pre-glacial maximum origin and has been found in ancient samples with hunter-gatherer backgrounds from Central and Northern Europe. So basically, just showing you that haplogroup I and J, they're both related, both being, in a sense, brother clades, and haplogroup I is predominantly found in Northern and Central Europe when it comes to ancient samples and even modern. And so here are the samples that they're talking about, the Bitrion or Bitrion and Serbia and Katos. Here's a closer image. So this is where the I sample was, and this is where the J sample was. And this is a chart, supplementary chart showing you the samples. The one we found was in Switzerland, the Bicryon, which was haplogroup I, as well as the other two, found all the way back in the Upper Paleolithic. And again, here's just the samples, just showing you from the supplementary table, haplogroup I, and then the two J samples. So now that we have a basic understanding of haplogroup IJ, and we were reminded that Caucasus hunter-gatherers and Western hunter-gatherers are basically brothers. They both descend from a common ancestral population. And this matches with the Y chromosomes, with Caucasus hunter-gatherers being haplogroup J and Western hunter-gatherers being haplogroup I. But now let's shift our focus to the brother of haplogroup J, obviously, haplogroup I, because this could give us insights into the biblical origins of both haplogroup J and I. Therefore, let's break down haplogroup I from an academic understanding first. So, haplogroup I is a Y chromosome DNA haplogroup. It is a subgroup of haplogroup IJ, which we just talked about. Subclades I1 and I2 can be found in most present-day European populations, with peaks in some northern European and southeastern European countries. Haplogroup I appears to have arisen in Europe, so far being found in Paleolithic sites throughout Europe, which we talked about. The common ancestor is IJ. Early evidence for haplogroup J has been found in the Caucasus and Iran. In addition, living samples of the predecessor haplogroup IJ have been found only in Iran among the Maz Radaznuri and, and ethnic Persians from Fars. This may indicate that IJ originated in Southwest Asia. Haplogroup I has been found in multiple individuals belonging to the Gravitinian culture. The Gravitinians expanded westward from the far corner of Eastern Europe, likely Russia, to Central Europe. So this is from EUpedia, titled Haplogroup I1 Y-DNA. And it says haplogroup I1 is the most common type of haplogroup I in Northern Europe. It is found mostly in Scandinavia and Finland, where it typically represents over 35% of the Y chromosomes associated with the Norse ethnicity. I1 is found in all places invaded by ancient Germanic tribes and the Vikings. After the core of ancient Germanic civilization in Scandinavia, the highest frequencies of I1 are observed in other Germanic-speaking regions such as Germany, Austria, the Low Countries, England, and the Scottish Lowlands, which all have between 10% and 20% of I1 lineages. And there's a map just showing you haplogroup I1. As you can see, it's extremely high in Scandinavia, in Northern Europe, far north of Northern Europe. And then you see it kind of almost disperses out from Scandinavia to neighboring regions in Europe, like the British Isles. And here's a bit of a closer image so you can see. Haplogroup I is the oldest major haplogroup in Europe, and in all probability, the only one that originated there. Haplogroup IJ would have arrived from the Middle East to Europe some 35,000 years ago, then developed into haplogroup I soon afterwards. Most of the late glacial and Mesolithic remains tested to date belong to haplogroup I star, which means ancestral I or one of the oldest I's, or I2. It is not yet clear in which part of Europe I1 originated. It has been speculated that I1 evolved in isolation in Scandinavia during the late Upper Paleolithic and Mesolithic periods, when hunter-gatherers from southern Europe recolonized the northern half of the continent from their last glacial maximum refugia. The oldest attested evidence of post-glacial resettlement of Scandinavia dates from 11,000 BCE, with the appearance of the Astrenberg culture. However, 5 Y-DNA samples from Mesolithic Sweden dating from 5,800 to 5,000 BCE and tested by Lezeres at 2013 and Hayek at 2015 all turned out to belong to haplogroup I2. Most likely hypothesis, the most likely hypothesis at present is that I1 and I2 lineages were dispersed around Europe during the Mesolithic, and that some branches prospered more than others thanks to an early adoption of agriculture upon contact with the Near Eastern farmers who were slowly making their way across the Balkans and the Mediterranean shores. Yet, distinct families would have spread in different directions and met varying successes in their expansion. It would appear that a founder effect in the northern LBK population led to a sudden explosion of I1 lineages, perhaps in parts thanks to their better knowledge of the Central European terrain and fauna, since hunting was typically practiced side by side with agriculture to, to complement the farmer's diet. I1 would later I1 would later have spread to Scandinavia from northern Germany. And so here is the LPK culture or the linear pottery culture. Uh, Basically, it's in northern Central Europe, a little bit to the east. But Scandinavian hunter gatherers would have adopted the new Neolithic lifestyle little by little, using pottery and keeping domesticated animals, sheep, cattle, pigs, and goats, to complement their traditional diet of fishing and game hunting. The cultivation of wheat, barley, and legumes was fairly limited due to the cold climate. The cold climate was was actually a barrier to the expansion of farmers from the continent. This is why Scandinavians retained a greater percentage of Mesolithic ancestry than virtually all other Europeans, apart from the Samsis, Finns, Blats, and Russians. No ancient Y-DNA from the Feldbecker culture in Scandinavia has been tested to date, but it is likely that I1 really started gathering momentum towards the end of the Funnel-Becker period. So here's the funnel Becker culture, and basically it's in Scandinavia and the northern part of Europe. So how did I1 spread around northern Europe? So how come that modern Scandinavians belong essentially to three haplogroups, I1, R1A, and R1B? That hasn't been found in Mesolithic Scandinavian samples. I1 would have been the first to penetrate into Scandinavia during the farming transition that lasted roughly from 4,200 to 2,300 BCE. It could be that the replacement of Mesolithic paternal lineages I star and I2 throughout Nordic countries, including Lapland and Finland, started with a few farmers and stock breeders that spread around Scandinavia, and through a founder effect belongs almost exclusively to I1. The alternate hypothesis is that I1 spread together with R1A Z284 from Denmark to Sweden and Norway during the Chalcolithic and early Bronze Age with the battle axe culture. So far, the earliest evidence of I1 in Scandinavia dates from the Nordic Bronze Age, with a small sample from Sweden dating from circa 1400 BCE by Alan Toff at 2015. It is in the vast majority of farming societies, men are the ones who inherit the land and the livestock. As wild game became scarcer, especially during cold winters, farmers would have had a definite advantage for food and survival prospects. As surely happened in other parts of Europe, women from hunter-gathering families were married to wealthy farmers. After several millennia, with agricultural land and livestock always inherited by I1 lineages from father to son, I1 became the dominant lineage even through their maternal lines had become hybridized over time. So how did I1 become Germanic? From 2800 BCE, a large-scale cultural genetic upheaval hit Scandinavia, with the arrival of the Indo-Europeans from Eastern Europe who introduced the Copper Age and early Bronze Age to the region, practically practically without Neolithic transition. The first Indo-Europeans to reach Scandinavia were the Korditwar people from modern Russia, Belarus, and Poland, who are thought to have belonged predominantly to haplogroup R1a, with a minority of R1b and I2a. These people shared some similar mitochondrial lineages as Scandinavian I1 inhabitants, including mitochondrial DNA U2 U2E, U4, and U5, but also brought many new lineages such as H2A1, H6W, and various subclades of I, J, K, and T. The second major Indo-European migration to Scandinavia was that of haplogroup R1b-U106, the branch that is thought to have introduced Proto-Germanic languages as an offshoot of the Proto-Celto-Germanic speakers from Central Europe. R1b probably entered Scandinavia from present-day Germany as a northward expansion of the late Intesu culture, which was 2300 through 1600 BCE. The oldest known R1b sample in Scandinavia dates from the Nordic Bronze Age, circa 1400 BCE. According to the Germanic substrate hypothesis, first proposed by Sigmund Fiest in 1932, Proto-Germanic was a hybrid language mixing Indo-European R1b and to a lower extent R1a, and pre-Indo-European Mesolithic I2 and Neolithic G2A and I1 elements. This hybridization would have taken place during the Bronze Age and given birth to the first Proto-Germanic civilization, the Nordic Bronze Age, which would have been around 1700 through 500 BCE. The Germanic migrations dispersed I1 lineages to Britain, Anglo-Saxons, Belgium, Franks, Saxons, France, Franks, Visigoths, South Germany, Franks, Switzerland, Iberia, Visigoths, Vandals, Italy, Goths, Vandals, Lombards, Austria, Ostrogoths, Lombards, Ukraine, Goths, as well as around Hungary and northern Serbia. The Danish and Norwegian Vikings brought more I1 to Britain, Ireland, the Isles of Man, Normandy, Flanders, Iberia, Sicily. The Swedish Vikings set up colonies in Russia and Ukraine and outposts as far as the Byzantine Empire, the Caucasus, and Persia. The higher frequency of I1 in northwest Russia, east of the Baltic, hints at had a particular strong Varangian presence, which is concordant with the establishment of the Calvin Ross by the Swedes. So, all Germanic tribes expanded from a small geographic core around Denmark and southern Sweden within the last 2,500 years. STR, or short tandem repeats, variations allows to divide I1 members in various categories. There are two main clusters, which each with their own subclades. So you have the northern cluster, peaking in Norway, Sweden, and Finland, which corresponds to the I1A2 subclade. It normally has an STR value greater than 22 for DYS390. Then there is the Norse group corresponds to Kin Nordetret Norse, mostly Swedish, and Ultra Norse, mostly Norwegian, and Icelandic haplotypes. The Ultra Norse haplotype 1 differs from the Norse one by having DYS385B. You also have the Bothian group. It's found mostly in Finland and northeast Sweden. It corresponds to I1A2C1 subclade, which it makes up 75% of I1 lineages in Finland. And now done dealing with the South cluster, because everything we said deals with the North cluster. Now with the South cluster, most common in Denmark, Germany, the Low Countries, and the British Isles, it corresponds with Kin Nordredic, the Anglo-Saxon haplotype, only Danish and Northern German. Then you have the Danish/Polish group, usually has a DYS 557 value greater than 15. Then you have the Western group, corresponding the lowlands, England, Scotland, and Ireland, matches the Z58 plus subclade. It probably matches Anglo-Saxon and the Pharisaian Batavian ancestry. There appears to be a specific Welsh subgroup defined by GATA-H4 value superior or equal to 11. This subgroup is also found in England and on the continent, but is especially common in Wales. And then you have the German group. It is the most common type of I1 in Germany, France, Italy, and Central Europe, but is also found in the British Isles and to the low extent in Scandinavia. It is defined by a DYS 456 value inferior to 15. It corresponds to the Z63 plus subclade. And so here's just a map, a Y-DNA I1 tree map showing you the groups that have it and the places where you find it, such as the Nordic, which is I1A1, the West Germanic, which is I1A2, and the East Germanic, which is Gothic, which is I1A3. And here's just a map showing you of haplogroup I-M170, basically the entire, region of the world where you find haplogroup I. As you can see, high concentration in Switzerland and Northern Europe. You also find it in the Balkans, more to the west of the Balkans, and then you find it in certain Middle Eastern populations because Vikings were indeed in the Middle East. They had outposts there. They also sold a lot of Slavic slaves to the Ottomans as well, which is why there's outposts in Anatolia and Persia and stuff like that. So, haplogroup I is mainly associated with Germanic and Nordic populations in Europe. Germanic and Nordic people are associated with Proto-Indo-European and Paleo or pre-Indo-Europeans. Ancestral Germanic Nordic people would have been associated with the corded wire culture. Proto-Germanic is a reconstructed proto-language of the Germanic branch of the Indo-European languages. You also have Proto-Nordic or Norse, also called Ancient Nordic, Ancient Scandinavian, Ancient Norse, Primitive Norse, Proto-Nordic, Proto-Scandinavian, and Proto-North Germanic, was an Indo-European language spoken in Scandinavia that is thought to have evolved as a northern dialect of Proto-Germanic in the 1st centuries CE. The corded wire culture comprises a broad archaeological horizon of Europe between circa 2900 BCE through 2350 BCE, thus from the late Neolithic through the Copper Age and ending in the early Bronze Age. The corded wire culture comprises a vast area from the contact horizon between the Yamnaya culture and the corded wire culture in South Central Europe to the Rhine on the west and the Volga in the east, occupying parts of Northern Europe, Central Europe, and Eastern Europe. And here is a map of the corded wire culture where we do see very high concentrations of haplogroup I as well in Scandinavia and Northern Europe. So, what would haplogroup I people look like? Again, where is haplogroup I in the world and who is it most associated with? So, regions in the world that we will be looking at is Scandinavia and Northern Europeans based on the frequency, Nordic, Western Germanic, and Eastern Germanic Gothic populations when it comes to haplogroup I. So let's begin with the Proto-Nordic, ancient East Nordic variety the eastern corner part of the Aristro-Nordics, together with early Mediterraneans. It was widespread in prehistoric Proto-Indo-European populations of the Eurasian steppes. Physical traits: pale to fair skin, straight or wavy, usually blonde, sometimes reddish hair, with blue eyes, green eyes, or gray eyes. As you can see, there's a map showing the distribution. And then you have the Nordic type itself, depigmented, rather tall and long, with medium skulled, relatively large headed group, found in its highest frequencies in Northern Europe, started to develop during the Upper Paleolithic, when Cro-Magnons settled in Europe, reached its modern form after the influx of Indo-European migrants from the east around 5000 BCE, corded wire, which is basically everything we just talked about. And then you have the Aristro-Nordic, Eastern or East Nordic subvariety, common in coastal regions of Baltic countries, pale skin, straight, usually blonde hair with blue eyes or gray eyes. And then you have the Delaphophyllid, a coarse Cro-Magnon-form Proto-Nord variety of Central and Northern Europe. Germanic migrations in antiquity dispersed it across Europe. Pale to fair skin, straight to curly blonde, sometimes red or brown hair, gray-blue or mixed eyes. And then you have the Tronerd, a Northern European type, combines features of Paleo-Atlantid, Helistrid, and East Nordid. One of the main elements in the ancient Vikings. Historic Viking migrations dispersed it across several other countries of Europe, such as France, Russia, and Italy. Rosy white skin, straight or wavy, often golden blonde, sometimes red or brown hair with light eyes. And then you have the Hall-Stressed. Nordit proper resembles the Iron Age remains of the Austrian village of Hallestrit, most common among Swedes and South Norwegians. Germanic tribes, Goths, Vandals brought traces to Spain, Greece, North Africa, and Russia. Pinkish pale skin, straight to wavy golden blonde, sometimes red or light brown hair, and gray-blue eyes. Then you have the Anglo-Saxon, Northwest European type, similar to Tronerd, but with a stronger Hallestrid component. Was was typified by the ancient Germanic tribes of Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, who conquered Britain from the 5th millennium, from the 5th century onward. Pale skin, straight to curly, often blonde, sometimes red or brown hair, with light mixed eyes. So basically, haplogroup J is typically dealing with Germanic and Nordic looking peoples, white skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair. Haplogroup I is also found heavily in the Balkans as well. So what would haplogroup I people in the Balkans look like? So this would be dealing with northern Alpine peoples. And so here's just a map just showing you again the Balkan areas right here. So the Alpine, a short-headed group with roundish features, often brown-haired with fair to light brown skin. Body tends to be thick-set and heavy, modest. Common in mountain regions of Central Europe and West Asia, developed during the Upper Paleolithic, could be connected to the off-knit types. And the Upper Paleolithic is what we were dealing with when it came to the haplogroup I. So the West Alpine. So Alpine proper, historically found in the mountain ranges of Western Europe, often a cohabitated of the second mountain type, the Dendritic, fair to light brown skin, straight or wavy, usually light brown hair, with a blonde minority. And then you have the Gorid, the East Alpine variety, named after the Polish word for mountain, Gora, fair to light brown skin, straight to wavy brown, sometimes blonde hair. And then you have the Strandriid, the alpinoid North European type, most common in southwest Norway. Fair to light brown skin, straight or wavy, usually brown to black hair, and mixed eyes. So, what's fascinating about haplogroup J and I people is that before the advent of haplogroup science, biologists were able to determine that Armenoids, who typically have haplogroup J, and Drenid and Nordid types, who typically have haplogroup I, all are similar in a sense when it comes to their crania being, round-headed peoples are brachycephalic. So this is from The Races of Europe by Carlton Stevens Kuhn, and he says the brachycephalid, brachycephalicized Mediterranean types, the mixed types. So you have the Drenics, a tall brachycephalic type of intermediate pigmentation, usually planoccipital, and shows the facial and nasal prominence of Near Eastern peoples. The basic population of the whole Drenic Alpine highlands from Switzerland to Europeus, also in the Carpathians and Caucasus, as well as Syria and in Asia Minor. Then, of course, you have the Armenoids, a similar brachycephalic composite type with the same head form as the Drenics, but a larger face and nose. The pigmentation is almost entirely brunette. The Peleus development of beard and body abundant. The nose high-rooted, convex, and the tip depressed, especially in advanced age. The difference between the Armenoid and the Drenic is that here it is the Iranian-Afghan race which flourishes the Mediterranean element, brachycephalicized by alpine mixture. The Nordic, a blonde plant occipital brachycephalo frequently encountered in southern Germany and elsewhere in Central Europe. This is apparently an Iron Age Nordic brachycephalized by Drenic mixture, and seems in most respects to take the form of a blonde Drenic variant. And so here is a Drenid, tall, short, a short-headed type with bony features, a flat occiput, and long nose, often brown-haired with fair to light brown skin, common in mountainous regions of Central and Eastern Europe, especially the Balkans, developed during the Upper Paleolithic, probably in the Middle East, and may be linked to the European bell pecker types of the Bronze Age. Some unite drenids with the armenoids and similar types in the Ternariid group, which we just talked about. Then you have the Norid, which we talked about as well, Central European type that closely resembles drenids, except for lighter pigmentation. Pale to fair skin, straight or wavy ashy blonde, occasionally red hair, light mixed, often blue or gray eyes, brachycephalic. And then, of course, you have the armenoid, short-headed and high-skulled type with fleshy features, a flat occiput and hooked nose, often black-haired with light brown skin, common in the mountain ranges or regions of Asia Minor, especially Anatolia and Armenia. So all these three types basically kind of look the same. So what have we learned? 1. Haplogroup J and I are brothers. 2. Western hunter-gatherers in Europe are haplogroup I. 3. Western hunter-gatherers split from Caucasus hunter-gatherers who are haplogroup J. 4. Western hunter-gatherers are associated with Northern Europeans. 5. Haplogroup I is associated with Proto-Indo-Europeans and Paleo or pre-Europeans. 6. Haplogroup I is associated with modern Germanic and Nordic peoples. And 7. Phenotypically, haplogroup I people look Nordic Germanic. And here is where we end with the origins of haplogroup IJ and I. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe, click the bell, and leave a comment for any questions you might have or anything interesting you might want to share. And follow the social media accounts that I mentioned at the beginning of the video to contact me. And with all of that out of the way, have a great day and shalom.